Talk about the Turnaway study and why this is such a crucial piece of information.
So the Turnaway study is extremely well known for a couple of its findings, which are that this Turnaway study found that 99% of women who got abortions 5 years later said they did not regret it. And they also found that women who were denied abortions had worse economic outcomes, at least for the first few years. And everybody has heard about these findings. The pro-life response to that has largely been to criticize the Turnaway study and parts of its methodology and other issues with it. And I'm not stating one way or the other about that in this case. What bothers me is that the Turnaway study also found that of the women who gave birth when they were denied abortion, 96% of them said they no longer wish they aborted. And the study that they published about this specifically cited bonding to their child as a major reason for this retrospective positive evaluation. I cannot emphasize to you enough how important this is. When you conduct an experiment, you have to have a control group. So you want to see what happens if I do this to this subject, and in order to really evaluate it, you have to have what's called a control group. So you have, what happens if I burn these cookies and the control group is these properly baked cookies or whatever. In the Turnaway study, the test group was the women who got abortions and the control group was the women who were denied abortions. So if you're going to evaluate how women feel about regret, then you need to talk about both. That's how scientific research is conducted. And yet the Turnaway study will talk ad nauseum forever about how all the women who got abortions didn't regret it, and then conveniently never speak about the control group, who also ended up not regretting that they didn't get abortions. Now, I want to be super clear. I'm not saying women don't regret being denied abortion, so we should ban abortion. That's not my point. We should ban abortion because it kills valuable human beings. But it is very important to understand that the women who were, and these are not women who just kind of thought about maybe I'll get an abortion. These are women who physically showed up at clinics to get an abortion that day, and they were denied, usually because they were over the gestational limit for the clinic. And they ended up saying they no longer wish they'd aborted. And so the Turnaway study is perfectly happy, the researchers of the Turnaway study are perfectly happy to talk about adverse economic outcomes and all of these things. And then they purport themselves as evidence-based, as advocating for women, as trying to let you know how it affects women when they can't get an abortion. And they have the audacity to not mention how the women who had these children and love these children feel about it. It is outrageous. It's paternalism. So if I am poverty-stricken or have a terrible relationship or other really stressful factors, and I go to an abortion clinic and I want to get an abortion and they don't let me, and that's very scary and I'm having a hard time. And then later on I have my child, I bond to my child, I love my child, and they ask me, well, knowing everything you know now, do you still wish you got an abortion? And I say no. It's basically like them responding, okay, but did you know that your credit score could be better? Are you kidding me? You're trying to tell, you are deciding, when you only tell the public about some of the outcomes and not others, you are deciding for everyone else what is and isn't important and how they should evaluate these major life-changing situations. If I'm a woman considering an abortion and I want to know, how does it affect women when they get abortions or not? Even assuming everything the Turnaway study says is accurate, even assuming that, it is not informed consent to say, well, all the women who got abortions didn't regret it, and the women who couldn't had worse economic outcomes, and that's all I have to tell you. That's not informed consent. You should also let them know that the women who gave birth after being denied an abortion almost universally said they did not regret it. And it's also important to know, and this is important for the pro-life movement also, there were still some women, 4% of women 5 years later said they still wish they gotten an abortion.
How do you explain that?
I was just going to say, they talked about some of the factors. One of the factors was if they placed for adoption, they were way more likely to still wish they'd gotten an abortion.
Because it was more painful?
I don't know. I would suspect they didn't get a chance to bond with that child, or adoption can be very traumatic, and for them, maybe it wasn't worth it. Also, women who had a lot of social support, way less likely to say. That should be axiomatic. It's not surprising to us at all. And it also begs the question, how many of these women going to get an abortion would just be happier if we gave them better social supports they didn't feel like they needed to? That's an important question. It doesn't speak to the legality of abortion, but it's something that both sides should care about.
Viability is the least plausible definition of personhood?
I mean, it depends on who you ask. I think it's ridiculous.
Explain that.
So viability is largely a matter of technology. When Roe v. Wade was decided, viability was thought to be between 24 and 28 weeks. Now you have this group called 22 Weeks Matters talking about how if you offer help to children born at 22 weeks, a lot of them can survive. The better our technology gets, the further back you're going to push it. Hypothetically, in a sci-fi future, if we got artificial wombs to work, viability would be any time you want. If it's just defined as being able to survive outside of a woman's uterus.
So you're saying that the pro-choice side is making a mistake when they put everything on viability. It's when a baby is viable, that's when we should care, because it could change. It's
a crazy definition for personhood. It might be a reasonable discussion if what you care about is bodily rights. and you're saying bodily rights are sacrosanct and a woman doesn't have to carry a pregnancy if she doesn't want to, because then you're saying, well, once they're viable, she doesn't have to and the child doesn't have to die. It might be reasonable for that, but that's not what they say. They say they're not a person until they're viable. That doesn't make any sense. So someone who lives in a state that doesn't have as good of children's hospitals, they're not a person, but if their mom flew to a state with better hospitals, then they would be. It doesn't make any sense. It has to be something intrinsic. It can't be based on external factors.
Will banning abortion lead to a surplus of unwanted children?
No, it won't. I have like 5 points about this, okay?
Go for them.
First of all, the Turnaway study found that women who gave birth after being denied an abortion, the vast majority of them raise those children themselves. Women who can't get abortions, for the most part, raise their children themselves. They don't just automatically decide they don't want to. You need to understand, and this goes for pro-life and pro-choice people, an unwanted pregnancy is not the same thing as an unloved child. There's very different factors to this. It is a mistake to think that those are the same thing. So first of all, the Turnaway study found that the vast majority of women who couldn't get an abortion raised their children themselves. Secondly, of the women who decided to place for adoption, newborn adoption is not the same as foster care. There is a huge waiting list.
This is my number one pet peeve. Number one pet peeve.
Yes. I think it's something like 30 couples for every one newborn infant waiting to be adopted, okay? Third point, let's say we were talking about foster care, which we're not, but let's say we were. Most of the children in foster care are not eligible for adoption because their parents want them.
Yes, that's the thing. Kids in foster care are there because their parents fell short or there was some abuse going on or something like that, and the state is always trying to reunify the parent with the child.
Yes, and there are a lot of foster families taking care of them that, if it should be the case that the bio parents don't manage to work it out, they want to adopt those kids. I'm not saying foster care is a walk in the park, but I'm saying the idea that there's just 400,000 children who nobody cares about.
Yeah, that's not true.
You may as well just say, I don't know anything about foster care, okay? Yep. Also important to know, when we talk about abortion restrictions decreasing abortion, everyone is debating whether or not it will prevent a pregnant person from getting an abortion or not. But that's not the only way that abortion restrictions decrease abortion. There's an indirect way. There's significant evidence to show that when abortion restrictions are put in place and we don't mess with contraception. So there are some countries historically that have banned abortion and contraception all at the same time. This is not that. There is the appetite for banning abortion in the United States is completely unlike any appetite for banning contraception. Contraception is very popular. People support it. In that context, where you're trying to regulate abortion and you aren't going after contraception, there's research to show that abortion regulations are associated with lower unintended pregnancy. Because when you make abortion less accessible, not everybody, but a subset of the population makes more cautious sexual decisions because they know they don't have abortion as a backup plan. I am not saying that these are people who are like, I'll do whatever I want, and if I need to get 8 abortions as birth control, I don't care. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that when people are forward thinking about risky situations, in the back of the mind they're thinking, I'm not going to get pregnant. I will avoid getting pregnant. But if I did get pregnant, at least I know this is an option. And when you take that option away, some people are more cautious. And this is not speculation. There is research to show that when the average distance is further to an abortion provider, more women use the pill. There's research to show that when you limit taxpayer funding on abortion, more women use the pill. There's research to show that women in pro-life states are more likely to use highly effective contraception than women in pro-choice states. And unless you're trying to argue that suddenly pro-lifers are way more into contraception than pro-choicers, it seems like there's another factor there. There's also, when Texas passed the heartbeat law in September 2021, there was this flurry of stories about men in Texas getting vasectomies. You saw the same thing after Roe v. Wade. All of a sudden, everybody was interested in vasectomies, which I have that's a special pet peeve, okay? I have no problem with vasectomies. If you know you don't want kids and you want to have procreative sex, I think it's a responsible thing to do. You could have done it the whole time. There was one story I read where this married couple who already had children, they knew they didn't want any more kids, and her last pregnancy had been very difficult for her, and they thought it would be dangerous if she had kids again. Totally respect it. Completely makes sense. So you could have gotten a vasectomy right then. And he waited until, I can't remember if it was the Texas heartbeat law or Dobbs. And he said, well, now we know this is the situation. I got to be really safe.
Oh,
what do you mean? You mean that her last pregnancy was super dangerous to her, so you figure she can always just get an abortion? The financial, emotional, physical repercussions of that are not a problem compared to the minimally invasive vasectomy? Look, I'm glad you got a vasectomy, but can we not write these like white knight stories? You know what I'm saying? What are you talking about? But that's a tangent, I'm sorry. The point is that You see these upticks in vasectomies. Planned Parenthood, there was one out of Texas where Planned Parenthood has seen a lot more people that are wanting highly effective birth control. They're reacting to their options and they're being more cautious. OkCupid, I think it was OkCupid, did like a survey after Dobbs, and one of the things they found is that, and this is a dating app, right? And they found that people were saying they were a lot more likely to use condoms. They were more hesitant about having sex. They were more concerned about avoiding pregnancy. So it's not just speculation on my part. Abortion restrictions decrease abortions because people who are pregnant are less likely to abort. But they also decrease abortions because there's less unintended pregnancies to begin with. And that also plays into the unwanted children thing, because people, pro-life and pro-choice people, have asked me, like, oh, if there's 800,000 abortions a year and we ban all abortion, now you're going to have 800,000 people go into foster care. No, in like 5 different ways. And one of them is that you can't assume that however many abortions you had last year is how many children you're going to have next year, because a lot of those pregnancies just aren't going to happen in the first place.
Right.